I say about 20 years ago, Chad, my husband, started to show some serious symptoms, diagnosed as Crohn's colitis, actually. Took us all through a really intense time, trying everything to just get the inflammation under control. And he lost a ton of weight. I think he got down to like, I don't know, 125, 128 pounds. So my weight, and he was originally like around 185, 190 at times, lifting weights, young and vital. So that said, basically what was happening is his guts were so inflamed that he wasn't absorbing anything, and so food was definitely not going where it was supposed to go. So the answers that I got with my basket of drugs was initially, advice has gotten a lot better. Avoid pizza, heavy foods, and take all these drugs. So he was on for many years some heavy drugs, a type of a chemotherapy. I remember suggested not to conceive during that time. Tons of prednisone to the point that they were more worried about his liver at times, and yeah, it was intense. Hopelessness was definitely arising more and more intensely as the years went on. Um, and it just felt like we were lost. There's a chain effect that occurs. It's sort of like a domino effect that can happen when, let's start with the mind-body connection. Let's say something happens, and whether it's a trauma or a sickness or something that's kind of perpetuating a hopelessness. And so as it gets darker and darker, it's you end up losing hope, and yeah, falling into I don't know, a perspective of depression or however it's diagnosed. And Kelly Brogan in one of our interviews was talking about how depression is actually a symptom. So it's not like the end of the road diagnosis, and underneath depression is just like this web of connection that leads to that title, that diagnosis. But many of us, myself included, can relate to the sort of gloomy, the dark sort of cloud that hangs over, which just continues to perpetuate certain cycles that feel deeper and heavier and heavier. While we were, you know, feeling more and more hopeless, and for myself, I tend to be really obsessive about things. So, you know, I've got this situation that I can't fix or solve. So I'm dealing as a caretaker with a whole bunch of different ups and downs and emotions, plus taking care of little kids, and not sure about our future. And so I really respect and honor people that have gone through like a long-term and are going through a long-term chronic condition where you know what really started to happen. People just got used to us being kind of like Chad being sick and, you know, just our situation. And that actually was worse than the beginning because it just became our sort of title. And so from finances to obviously relationship connections, you know, I had to, I'm just gonna be super honest, deal with like feelings of resentment and then feeling like really guilty that I felt resentful because I wasn't suffering. And there's a gazillion, that's my word, gazillion. So that's why I realized it's so essential to connect the mind and the body together. So not that we have all the answers, and this vlog is not a vlog of advice. It's just sharing our journey. So sometimes when you get to the end of the road and you feel like your options are lost, you realize maybe you're looking in the wrong spot. So we were advised to, yeah, just stick with protocol even though it wasn't working. We had to switch GI doctors. We found a really great guy in Brantford who was a little bit more open-minded to look at the whole picture. It was getting worse and worse. Nothing was working, nothing at all, to the point where it was like, there's nothing we can do. So that said, I remember the reason I came across yoga, which was like foreign to me, totally foreign to me, was actually I was walking through the mall and there was a book that was being advertised, and basically the lady that was advertising the book just mentioned that she had Crohn's and she found yoga and how it had helped. I just couldn't put the two things together because I did not look at it in the way that how can it connect? How could yoga connect with inflammation of the gut? And separate where the whole human is this intricate interconnection, and you can't separate it. So a simple kind of silly example is like when you stub your toe, just because your toe is little, it hurts a lot. So you can't minimize and divide. You know what it is? I feel like there can be a narrative that we follow that begins to suppress because of the maybe the whack jobs and the quacks that we sort of put in one big bin all inquiry outside of that narrative lumped as one. And I see that as dangerous because what can happen is we minimize our available answers. We also cause more harm, I think, in the end than good. I love this time in history where, you know, like through podcasts and books, the inquiry is opening up. And there were two things that we came across, or I should say I came across. Chad was just too tired and too weak. So for probably like 10 years, so this is like an ongoing process. And there were two things that came up that contribute to hopelessness. So there was sometimes, not always, strong advice from, I'll just say like the narrative or protocol, which, like I said, wasn't working, almost threatening to not explore. So right away, that was like kind of off and confusing and really disheartening. And then the second part is like in your exhaustion and your hopelessness, that's what arises, and you just feel. I remember reading *Sapiens*, great book, Yuval Harari. He was discussing how human beings, pretty much all, just we want to feel good, we want to feel happy, we want to, and we'll take our measures to achieve that. And he touched on how like there's two main chemicals that we're all reaching for to find some balance: serotonin and dopamine. And a really interesting connection is the gut and serotonin. And this is the way I've been looking at it lately, where dopamine is kind of that hit that we get from, like, I don't know, I'm gonna say lust, like sugar and just those things. And the problem with that is it doesn't last long, and the hit has to go higher and higher, and that's around the science of addiction, and that's not my domain whatsoever. Serotonin is a lot of the receptors, and it's generated in our gut. So there's a direct link to a healthy gut, and I'm going to link serotonin to that more peaceful feeling. And if you think about going deeper, and so this is the yoga side of me, and when we lift up tall and we stop hunching and we breathe a little bit deeper, we begin to open up those pathways to the gut as the diaphragm moves. And that's why this breathing is partly linked to peace, and also it also enhances this ability for our serotonin factory to become more efficient, and that's directly linked to our gut microbiome, and it's just all connected. Sometimes we would discover something that would really help. And what I noticed was like our experience wasn't valid because it didn't fit in a certain, I guess, bin box. So what I'm noticing, and I'm gonna fast forward to now, is that's all changing. So that's really exciting to. I love it when people are asking honest questions, truly honest questions without like pushing an agenda, just like asking and constantly researching how the body works. And that's science. Science evolves based on evidence. And I think we need to open our eyes to evidence and realize also some of the evidence that we have in maybe some evidence is just based on the studies that have been funded, and sometimes those studies are funded for narrow reasons. So there's a lot more out there than I think we realize, and that's changing, that's growing. So I'm going to point you to some of my favorite authors and scientists right off the bat. I'm starting to connect with Kelly Brogan. Brogan. I'll screenshot one of her podcasts, and I also love Dr. Rhonda Patrick. Some of you may know her. She's been interviewed on Joe Rogan, and she has her own really sciencey podcast. I love how she's obsessed in a good way with research, and I'm really struck by the mind-body connection. Obviously, it's the reason why I practice yoga. So every thought that we have has a measurable effect in the body, and everything we do, everything we say is, I love to think of it this way, that our body is actually listening. So not just what we eat, we often focus on diet, which is like a major factor, but what is our diet? It's our environment, it's our five senses and what we're bringing into our five senses. There was some advice that I really resonated with, and the picture was that we're like a battery. And how sometimes we have to look at ourselves even from an electric standpoint. So like if you've ever heard of grounding, so just our feet on the ground, outside barefoot, just even like the minerals and the salts that we have that are from the earth, like true unrefined salt. So often salt has had like a bad rap. And sunshine, so like the actual sunshine, and I know that there's always a balance, and there's like these like points, and sometimes we'll lean towards the bad rap, but it's so important to get that like literal sunshine, and sleep. The experts often were mothers watching their babies grow, and knowing what heals. So just like the magic of sleep, and the healing power of sleep, and how crappy sleep impacts measurably and so insanely dramatically our health. Even the next day after a crappy sleep puts us at great risk for disease. Just sleep. And hydration, and just like our basics, that sometimes we just moving and breathing deeply. Just the makeup of our gut cells and microbiome is matched really precisely to healthy dirt, hopefully healthy dirt. The state of literally our land is a reflection of the state of our health. And I think that it's interesting just to connect those dots, like the antibiotics, like Roundup, and the ingredient glyphosate. If you look up, like that's something that's really linked to just like, and even just the antibiotics that we eat through industrial meat, and how that affects our microbiome in our guts, plus all of the uses of antibiotics, which have definitely saved lives, but also been seriously overused, and how all of that adjustment leaves us as human beings really vulnerable to different diseases. And I'm just going to quickly touch on really simply like our gut microbiome, and also the nerves that innervate the gut are closely linked to our mind. And when we wipe those out over and over again with antibiotics, we set ourselves up to become vulnerable to other things. So even like adjustments in fungus, and like, I'm not going to get into that, but all of that, that evidence is directly linked to how we feel. Also, if you want to look at it this way, it leaves almost like little holes in our gut where before the food is properly digested, there's undigested little particles that are leaking into our bodies and creating this autoimmune response and launching all these antibodies. So that's where a lot of these gut allergies come from, and reactions. So there is so much research out there, and it's growing and growing in really good research. We can take a step back from that microscopic, chopped up, sort of like you go to this specialist, go to that specialist, where we need to integrate the whole. And I think we can even back up even further and scan our world and our land, and then kind of like pan out and then pan back in. And I think that that's like a really great way to gain some perspective. And I think most of us can relate to, like, if we have a really nice day where we're out in the forest and sunshine and we're breathing deeply, just how we just like feel better. Or or even like those days at the beach where some of us love the water. I'm so grateful for this country, Canada, for our healthcare system, and I'm just really want to point out that I am so grateful for the research that saves oodles and oodles of lives, and the medicines that are out there that are sustaining and saving lives. I just wanted to kind of make a delineation where I think that there's a bit of a gap between sort of healthcare that's necessary for, you know, acute or even emergency response is just where I'm so grateful for. And then there's this like humongous ditch, and on the other side is chronic. So I think that we are evolving based on all of this sort of inquiry, and just as we evolve, what is our measuring stick for health? Do we wait until we feel really bad? And I am a firm believer in optimizing health. So where we're at, we, instead of from a place of fear, but where we're at, what can we do to mitigate just sort of the assaults on our health that are just like around us, our environment, like I mentioned, the earth and the condition of the soils and the foods. And there's simple ways to minimize exposure to some of the toxins that can end up wreaking havoc on our internal battery system and our internal amazing intricate connection. And we have two kind of main branches or highways in our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. And it's this amazing, intricate connection throughout our entire body. And I'll look at it kind of like as a teeter-totter. So often we're breathing shallow, we're a little bit hyper, we're up here, and that's stimulating our sympathetic nervous system. And that's that like generating of like that prompt of primally fight flight, and it's exhausting for the body, and it's only meant to be in spurts, like when you actually are in danger, but we're often in that zone. And then the parasympathetic, we call also rest and digest, is when we're in that zone, we're much more efficient to prompt the parasympathetic. Just take deeper breaths. Ben Greenfield, I just listened to a discussion with Eric Weinstein, I think his name is, on the Portal. It's a pretty good podcast. Sometimes his interviews are like a little bit over my head, but I listen and I try. But anyway, Ben Greenfield was just talking about how whenever he eats and his family eats, they take 3 big breaths to prep digestion. And so this is my next step I'm working on is I am a healthy fast food person. And I realized, you know what, I can optimize definitely my nutrition just simply by slowing down, recognizing my food. And I know traditions that say grace before they eat.